Okay, hello, welcome. So before I even do any intro to who I am or what's going on, we're just gonna jump right into a practice. And the invitation is for you to just be curious and see, does my nervous system like this right now? And if you don't, then maybe don't do it. You're welcome to just kind of like sit back and listen and take a beat to see if you want to try it out or not. But we're just gonna get right in. So this is a practice that I learned from two somatic practitioners in Canada, Hannah Harris Sutro and Marika Heinrichs, and it's called Feeling Your Edges. So I'm going to stand up to demonstrate it. You're welcome to try it standing or sitting or laying down, whatever works best. But basically, I'm going to be patting and then brushing and then squeezing. So it's just a way to kind of like be with your body a little bit. Okay, so I'm starting with just kind of patting my head, and I'm going to go from my head down to my feet. So I'm just patting. Being curious about like how much pressure do I want? How fast do I want to go? And then the next move is brushing. So no rush, but as soon as you're done with your patting, so patting and then brushing. And the brushing, I kind of do it like I'm brushing like cobwebs or dust or something off. So nice long brush strokes. Again, from your head kind of down. And then the last part of it, when you're done with your long brushes, is we're going to squeeze the bones. So in some areas of your body, this is a little bit easier to do than others, but we're not massaging muscle. We're just kind of like giving our deep bones a good squeeze. Again, moving down from our head down. And whenever you're done, just like taking a moment and seeing how that is. Being curious about, did your nervous system like that right now? Do you want to try it another time? So I like that one because sometimes this stuff is like you have to kind of like use your imagination and sense into different places, but this is just like really tangible, practical, slap in your body, feels different. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kelly McCarthy. I am a clinical herbalist and somatic experiencing person. Um, I've been working with clients herbally for 10 years, and I did my somatic experiencing training. I finished in 2021. So I've been doing somatic stuff a little bit less long, but I work one-on-one with clients. So if some of the stuff that we do today, you're like, oh, I actually want to like go into this a little bit more. This piques some curiosity, or I want some more support around this, you're welcome to reach out. And I also just wanted to mention that I'm teaching a different sort of unrelated class on November 19th. I'm teaching a class about the gut-brain axis. So using herbs to support the overlap of digestive symptoms and mental health symptoms. It's one of my other areas that I get really nerdy and excited about. So there's a link if you want to read more about that. And then I have a newsletter where you can stay in touch if some of this stuff is like, yeah, just piquing your curiosity. Um, so we are going to try a bunch of different practices this evening. And we're working with different nervous system states. And one of the more interesting things I think about the somatic training that I got is we are curious about if we can kind of match the nervous system state that we're in with a practice that kind of like feels uh, aligned. And I'll talk more about what this means. But the class tonight, we're focusing on fight, flight, and freeze. These are more sympathetic or higher activation nervous system states. They are an integral part of our survival. We like can't really live without fight, flight, freeze. So I just want to like depathologize them and say like, yes, these are good. We need them. And because these are nervous system states that generally help keep us safe, or that was sort of their evolutionary adaptation that's part of why they're online is to keep us safe. We're very wired to pay attention to these states, and we're very good at going into these states. And we oftentimes need more practice with moving into a more parasympathetic or calm nervous system states, rest and digest. So I just want to set up the framework like it's not better to be calm. We just need more practice with that usually because of the world that we live in. And in this class, we're not talking much about fawn or appease, which is another, it's sort of in that fight, flight, or freeze. But in the handout, there is my favorite person who talks about fawn is Nakem Nadefo, who's a somatic practitioner who has an organization called Lumos Transforms. And I link to her website, and there's some like podcast interviews where she talks more about fawn and some of the like social conditioning and like different identities that like where fawn is more part of the day to day. And I just find what she has to say about it really helpful. So you can check that out. And then the last thing I want to say before getting into some practices is like, yeah, I don't, in some ways, like this class is a little bit like, here's some hacks. But also, what I want more than anything is for all of us to just build up our skill of like tracking your own nervous system every day and being like, what's up? What do you need? How can I help you get that? And so some of these are like maybe entryways into once you have been like, oh, I feel XYZ, let me try this. But I would love for us all to just be a little bit more like attuned and curious about like our nervous systems because we are relational beings, and how our nervous system feels, how my nervous system feels affects how the other people's nervous systems around me feel. And I think it's like it's a cool way that we can like help shift and build a world that we want to live in. Um, and I have a couple thoughts about how to like build that skill of being more in tune and aware of your own nervous system. And the first one is a basic shit practice, which is asking yourself repeatedly throughout the day, do I have to pee? Am I hungry? Am I tired? Do I have to poop? How's my sensory experience right now? Are the lights too bright? Is the noise too loud? Um, and so that's the first part is like just asking yourself these questions. And then the second harder part sometimes is uh following up with, yes, I have to pee, so I'm actually going to stop what I'm doing and go pee. Because our we have a very deep, like, early conditioning to ignore what our body needs and wants. Anyone been to public school? Like, you know, so yeah, I that's one practice is, and sometimes I'll have people like set a little alarm in their phone. So it's like 3 times a day, you just get like, ding, do you have to pee? Are you hungry? Are you tired? And then can we, attend to those needs? Um, there's also a link or in the handout, um, one of the other tools for helping to sort of build that skill of daily awareness of your nervous system is a centering practice that comes from generative somatics. And I put like how to Google it to find the recording because it's the one that I use is on a podcast interview, and so you can find it a couple different places depending on how you listen to podcasts. Um, and then the last thing is just a concept called the prodromal stage. So the prodromal stage, I first became aware of learning about migraine headaches, learning about herpes, cold sores, like a herpes sore. And it's basically a sort of medicalized term that means like what's happening before there's like the peak experience. And we can get really curious about our own nervous system. What's our own nervous system doing in the prodromal stage before we are really activated? And sometimes there will be a trigger and we just go 0 to 100 and there's not much of a prodromal stage. But sometimes there's a really long prodromal stage where we'll you know, for me, it's like I'll notice my shoulders are up. I'm feeling a little like tight and jittery. I might have my butt clenched. I'm like, my feet are a little bit restless. And that's like my body being like, your nervous system activation is rising. Like, do you want to do anything about it? Again, we're just curious about that question of like, what might you need or want right now? Um, and then the last kind of curiosity that I would like to invite you into in a sort of long-term, this is the homework for the rest of your life, is how do you know when your nervous system is starting to downshift? When you're starting to go more into rest and digest? And there's a couple physiological signs that you can look for. And I put them in the handout, but I just want to name them here, which is a sigh or a spontaneous deep breath. There's potentially a yawn. The digestive system comes online. So, the parasympathetic, this more calm nervous system state is rest and digest, colloquially. And that might be experienced as burping, farting, borborygmus, which is the medical word for your stomach is like rumbling. You might be salivating. You might notice you're hungry. Um, there might be some small like reorganization movements, like it might be a shiver or a like deeper settling. For some people, there's just an absence of tension that's there like all day, every day. One of the other signs that your nervous system might be downshifting when our is that your eyes are looking around a little bit more and a little bit more like there's a little bit more curiosity to that. Because when we're in a more activated nervous system state, our vision tends to be a little bit narrower and we tend to be looking straight ahead. So your eyes are roaming around. You might even notice there's movement in your neck and shoulders. Um, you're taking in more senses. You're taking in more information through your senses. So like, oh, and I'm just clocking that there's traffic outside and I wasn't aware of that a few moments ago. And then the last sign that your nervous system might be downshifting is there's a desire to connect with others. So those are some things you might want to just be curious about tonight, like as we're practicing different tools, like what are you noticing in your own body? Um, Okay. The we're going to shift into trying some things now. So, we're going to start with fight. And fight is can be big and scary. Fight is the a nervous system state that's emotionally often related to feelings of irritability, frustration, anger, rage, eye rolling is a sort of like very low key fight response. Um, Not always low key, but depending on if the person can see you or not. But before we try any of these practices for anger, I just want to say that, um, yeah, fight can feel really scary to some bodies. And that's just a preface. So our goal here, because we're in our own homes, we're doing a Zoom recording. This is not like a little private session. We're just kind of dipping our toes into this. So the invitation is to like, can you like test out and see how this feels without diving all the way in? Um, one of my favorite things to do personally and to teach clients for fight is to engage some of the like mammalian fight reflexes in our face and in our hands. And so we have all seen what an animal looks like when it's going into fight. They bare their teeth. They get a like fuck you look in their eyes. There's a like furrowing of the brow. Um, there's sometimes growling or hissing, and there's the claws are engaged. So we're going to practice this together if you'd like. And if your camera is on and you want to turn it off because it feels silly, please do that. But basically, it's going to look something like this. And then just seeing, like, just checking it out for a moment, letting it kind of move through your body and just how is that? Is there heat? Is there tension? And then another question is like, do you want to try it again? Which we can answer sort of cognitively, or we can just be like, does my body want to do that again? And if you do, you can try it again. And I actually don't recommend doing it more than like 2 or 3 times in a row. My cat is confused. Yeah, right. It's fun. It's like interesting to be around animals and do this because they're like, I know about animal things. Like, what are you doing? Um, I also think this is a kind of a fun one to do in front of the mirror. Doing it in front of the mirror can engage both the adult rational mind that is like, this is so silly, I cannot believe I'm doing this. And then the nervous system part that's like, I'm pissed and I need to get this out. Um, so I use this a lot driving. I have a lot of road rage, and this really helps the like, okay. I feel like this practice is like releasing just a tiny little valve of like anger because anger can be an overwhelming feeling. Fight is scary. Sometimes it can like we stuff it back down and then it goes inward, and so we're trying to just release it. And then there's one more uh fight thing, which I'm going to show you. And if you want to get up and try it, you can, or you can just watch and do it again another time. But I'm going to stand up and face a wall and basically push into the wall. And what I'm doing is trying to engage the muscles, these big muscles like my quads and my glutes, and I don't know the muscle names, but like the muscles that are engaged when you would actually be fighting. So I'm going to push into the wall and again do the kind of like piercing eyes and like thing, push into the wall and then stand up and just kind of see how that feels. So let's see, I guess I'll go back. I kind of want to show you like from the side, but it's like this. And then again, the question is, do you want to do it again? Like, does my body want to do that again? And same with the other practice. I don't recommend doing it more than like 2 or 3 times in a row, but pushing against the wall can also be really helpful. So those are my two favorites for fight. Okay, flight. So flight is another active, activated nervous system state. Emotionally, often it is related to worry, anxiety, fear, panic, just like the feeling to be like, bye, I'm out. Um, and yeah, my favorite, but basically what we want to do for flight, if we're feeling flighty, is help our physiology, help our body know that we fled. And the easiest way to do that is you can do this standing or sitting. But basically we're going to engage our like bipedal movement. So um, it just looks like this. And if you're like in a place where you don't want to be like doing this, you can just kind of like move yourself from foot to foot. But doing this motion, if you're sitting, you can bring your feet up and just kind of let your feet do that motion. But basically that's helping send nerve signals up to the brain like, we fled, you can stop dumping all the adrenaline into the bloodstream. Um, and I want to do a more intense sort of running in place thing. So if you'd like to try this, um, this one is easier to do if you're standing, although you can still do it sitting. But if you're standing, you're going to get up, and I'm like kind of doing this a little hard, and I'm feeling the floor come up through my feet. And then I'm going to get my hands involved, just a little bit marchy looking. And then for about 30 seconds, I'm going to run in place. And when I'm running, I'm going to go whoo on the out breath. So I'm going to start now. Whoo, 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 whoo. And slowing back down. And I'm going to end with just the feet. And again, just checking it out. How do I feel? Um, I have a little story about that one. I my mom is diabetic, and we were going on a camping trip, and we like got to where we were going kind of in the middle of nowhere, and she was like, "Oh my God, I don't have my insulin with me." Which if you're diabetic, that she has type 1 diabetes, and you basically like can't live without insulin. She would maybe be okay for a day or two or something, but it's like very serious. And she just went into like full panic. Like couldn't like look in her bag, couldn't like I've never seen her so panicky. And I was like, "Okay, mom, here's what we're going to do. We're going to run in place for 30 seconds and then we're going to look for your insulin. And it worked. It was like that kind of took her to a place where she's like, okay, like this, like, anyway, there was such a huge adrenaline rush that it's like, and I think that's one of the unfortunate and shitty things about the fight or flight is that once fight or flight is engaged, there's not a ton of like adult cognitive brain on board. We're just really in survival mode, which is why that prodromal state is so important. And like I said, we don't always, there's not always a prodromal state. We don't always have a buildup, but the more we can kind of clock, oh, I'm moving towards like a high activation state, that's when we have more choice in our behavior and our but getting tools on board because once we're like really up there, it's like I don't even know what to do. So maybe you'll remember to do some of these things. Who knows? Um, but yeah, we're going to move into freeze now. Um, oh wait, sorry. There's one more thing with the flight. Um, that's kind of overlaps with freeze is that you can, if you can't physically get up and move your body at all if you're feeling flight, you can use what is called the motor image channel, which is basically a fancy way of saying, imagine yourself leaving. I think my favorite thing that I learned in my like 3 year, very expensive somatic training is like imagination heals trauma. Um, there's like a lot more to it, but basically that was one of my takeaways was like you can through being in a flight state and letting yourself imagine fleeing, or we could do the same with fighting. We'll do the same with freeze. You are helping those neural pathways get built in the brain. You're sending signals through the nervous system that like this is happening. We can enhance that if we can get the body actually engaged in doing that. But yeah, it's pretty cool to me as also as someone who's like, does more like woo magic stuff. I'm like, haha, science caught up. Okay. So I want to talk before we get into practices for freeze, just a little bit more about freeze. And in the handout that I sent, there's a better diagram than what I'm about to show you, but I have a little chart. Freeze is a very highly activated nervous system. It doesn't feel like it and it doesn't look like it. Sometimes it feels like it, but basically we have like, this is the social engagement part of our nervous system. We're down here. This is our nervous system kind of moving through activation. We go up through fight and flight and into freeze. But basically, on any given day, our nervous system is supposed to go up and down and up and down. Like it's normal for us to get a little bit more activated, a little bit less. Activation, deactivation, activation, deactivation. That's part of being human, part of interacting with people, part of like being the social animals that we are. Um, and what freezes is the nervous system is activated. It's getting into fight or flight. And it basically gets to a point, this is backwards for you guys too. It gets to a point where we basically hit nervous system overwhelm. And the nervous system's like, I'm done. I'm out of here. This is too much. And then we go into freeze. And freeze can feel really nice, actually. Um, the shitty thing about freeze is coming out of it because you come out, you have to come back into activation to come out. That's just like how this cycle goes. And so what happens a lot of times is that people will start to come out, get back into activation, be like, oh, this is terrible, and go right back into freeze. So sometimes people are kind of living like up along this line here um, where we would hope to be living down here a little bit more, but we all go up into this. But a lot of people like live around, a sort of low key freeze all the time. Um, so some of the common ways that people will come out of it is like really intense crying. Sometimes people will just fall asleep. Sometimes people will just like kind of totally numb out with TV or something. Um, but yeah, it generally feels kind of harsh to come out of freeze. And I think the term freeze is, when we think about that, it's like, yeah, thawing is like, I don't know if you know that, I don't, if you, I live in a cold place where like if you are really cold and then you come inside, it's like, it can be really painful to let your hands and feet start to get sensation back into them. And that's kind of like what's happening on a nervous system level. So emotionally, what's often going on with freeze is there's overwhelm, there's procrastination, there might be competing impulses, shame, confusion, hopelessness, helplessness, just kind of feeling like you're going through the motions. Um, but yeah, basically the nervous system is really overwhelmed. And so somatically, we're not trying to do much. We're offering the nervous system like teeny tiny little things. Um, because trying to do a big ask, like that's just one more overwhelming thing to do. Um, so a place that I like to start is again that motor image channel. So like if you're noticing that you're in freeze, which again, sideline, like what does that look like and feel like for you? What's happening? Like, is your breathing shallow? Are your hands cold? Do you actually have no idea like what the room you're in looks like? Like just what's freeze like, getting to know it. But let's say that you're in freeze and you're like, okay, I think maybe like calling a friend might be helpful or going on a walk might be helpful. Where you want to start is just imagining it first and like letting your nervous system orient to that possible change. So you're in freeze and you're like, okay, I think I should call a friend. And then picture yourself like picking up the phone, opening the call thing, calling your friend. They answer. Like just kind of let your nervous system get used to that idea. Um, in when we're in freeze, we often need and want social connection, but it also feels scary because we're like feeling sometimes more vulnerable or shut down. So I recommend there are ways to sort of get some of that social connection, but in ways that you're in control of it. Music is one of the best ways to do this. So if music is not already part of your life, I'm here to put a plug in for music. Probably most of us already like have some music, but it can be helpful to just be like, these are kind of my go-to like comforting songs or albums or artists or whatever. Putting on an audiobook, especially like an old familiar friend, can be good. It's funny to recommend TV, but I'm like, especially a show that you're like, this is my old familiar friend. Like, these are ways that we can start to engage the social part of our being, but you're still in control. You can turn it off, you can change the volume, you can decide to do something else. So there's a question here, like, would you suggest upbeat music or any music? I think you'll have to try it out, but for me, if I'm in kind of freeze and overwhelm, what I've noticed for myself is I will be like upbeat music. I need like I'm like kind of like snap out of this. And then I put it on and I'm like, oh my God, this is so abrasive. Even if it's something I generally usually like. So I tend to go for something a little bit more mellow. And I have a few albums that I'm like, these are my go-tos. Because I have enough experience with them and familiarity that I'm like, I know how this is going to feel to me. Um, I love beach house when I'm in freeze. Um, and another way that we can engage with that like social part of ourselves is going into like this is also like a not always going to work, but go and sit in like your favorite coffee shop and don't talk to anyone. Just like letting your social body be a social body among other people sometimes can help, or going into like a park or some kind of nature where you can get a little bit of connection. But it's not necessarily with a person. It might be with a plant or a tree or an animal. If you have pets, they are like, it's my favorite thing about working with clients on Zoom is I'm like, oh, there's just an easy, this being that is like so full of love and like generally uh, simple engagement. So that's helpful for freeze. Some other things that can be helpful for freeze is rocking. If you have a rocking chair, that's awesome. But you can also just like, if you want to try it with me right now, just doing a little rocking. You can do side to side, front to back. You can add some humming to that. Especially humming a song that is like again an old familiar friend to you or something that's going to be comforting. Um, yeah, there's a question, what about going to a library? That would be awesome. That's a great place to like be around other people but not actually be engaged with other people. That might be nicer than going to a cafe because I'm like I can just see if you're already in overwhelmed, going to a loud place might be further overwhelming. Um, Another thing that we can do, and this is not necessarily always in freeze, I do this at the beginning of almost every somatic session with a client, but it's a practice called orienting. And I'm going to sort of talk us through this and then you can try it. But orienting is what most animals, mammals, will do when they perceive a threat, is they'll stop. And then they basically kind of like slowly check out their surroundings to be like, what and where is a threat? Oh, it was just a squirrel stepping on a leaf. But you can notice yourself doing this actually, like, or notice that anyway. So what I would like us to try, if you want to try orienting, we're going to do visual orienting. Um, but you can also try, if you are visually impaired or if orienting is overwhelming, you can also just orient through your sense of sound, or you can orient through your sense of touch by like just touching your clothes. But basically, I would like you to take your eyes off the screen and look around. You're letting your eyes move. You're letting your neck move. You're turning down to the waist. You're looking behind you, even if you know what's behind you. Checking up to the ceiling, down to the floor. Basically letting your animal body take in your space. Where are the exits? What colors do I see? How big is this room? And I've been doing orienting for a bunch of years. So now when I orient, I notice I take a big deep breath at the end. It's like that does settle my nervous system. But if you're in freeze, doing a big orienting, like where you're taking the whole room, might be a little bit too much at that moment. So you can orient to like, for example, I have a plant right across from me now. And so I can just like let myself really take in what colors do I see? What's the shape of the pot? How close is it to the wall? Just kind of like letting myself slowly take in a smaller version of something else and see while I'm doing that, can I also bring in more other senses? Can I bring in my sense of hearing or smell? Can I bring in my sense of touch? And then sometimes taking a shower or a bath is another good way to just like have a kind of low stimulation shift in your nervous system. Yeah, so there's a question, what's the connection between freeze and dissociation? Is dissociation a type of freeze? Basically, yeah, that's a pretty much dissociation is freeze. They're two different ways of talking about it. And there's sort of different levels or like levels of intensity of that. It's like you can be kind of like a little bit freezy and a little bit dissociated, or you can be like, there's a very high level of freeze where you're basically immobilized and catatonic, and that often is in a more life or death situation, which is, outside of the scope of what we're doing here today. Um, these tools are for more the kind of day-to-day, like, oh, I'm a little bit checked out. Um, yeah. And then could I talk a little bit more about the procrastination piece, why that comes with freeze? Yeah, my understanding is that it's about overwhelm. That procrastination is often because there's just like some overwhelm in what needs to be done, what order it needs to be done. I think, one of the biggest critiques of somatics as a general field is that not, it's pretty pathologizing to neurodivergence. Which you can like read a lot more about that if you want to go down those rabbit holes. But um, yeah, there's like more I could say about that, but I'm just gonna leave it there for now. And then there's another question: what are hiccups when dysregulated? I don't totally understand your question, but what I can tell you about hiccups is it's a spasm of the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is this muscle that like it's a muscle that's very involved in the nervous system. It's this basically it looks like an upside down paper bag, and the bottom of the bag is the top of the diaphragm, and it goes between the lungs and all the way around our digestive tract. And people who have experienced, especially more like acute, like accident trauma or shock, will often like, it's like you do that when it happens, and then your whole diaphragm is just bracing. So there can be like tension here. In generative somatics, they call that an armoring band, where it's just like this, it's a common place for people to like just hold a lot of tension, and it can affect breathing, it can affect digestion. And yeah, hiccups are the diaphragm spasming, from what I understand. I am someone who had hiccups every day for like many years of my life, but I don't have them so much anymore. I haven't thought about hiccups in a long time. Anyway, okay. Um, and then there's a couple other practices I want to share in our last 15 minutes that are, I think, generally helpful practices to kind of wind down. Um, or not necessarily wind down, but just like maybe. Anyway, one of them I learned from my friend and colleague, Sarah Yaski. So you take your hands like this, grab onto one thumb. Now stick out the finger of the hand that is grabbing onto the thumb and grab onto that finger. So in one hand you've got a thumb and in one hand you've got your pointer finger. And then you're just going to squeeze back and forth. Thumb, finger, thumb, finger. And if you want to get this kind of lined up with your breathing, one on the inhale, one on the exhale. So we'll practice that for a second. You don't have to change your breath. I really like this one. I use this one in public a lot because it's kind of like stealth. It's great for meetings. It's great if you're like in person and are feeling kind of like, you can, yeah. So I'll show you that one more time. You grab your thumb and then you grab the other finger. So Um, another practice that I'm just like, boom, 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 here we go. So thank you for just trying a bunch of stuff. And there's just two more things I want to share. Um, this one is a practice of self-touch. And self-touch can be really grounding, regulating. It can help us kind of come back into being curious about like what's going on in my body. So I usually start by rubbing my hands together to just bring a little bit of energy into my hands. And I'm checking out, like, is there a place in my body that needs a little bit of extra support? Is there a place that I feel some tension or pain or discomfort or numbness, someplace I don't feel at all? And then just bringing a hand there. And you're not massaging, you're just being curious about what happens when that area gets some attention. Is there any change in your breath? Is there any change in the sensation of that area? And just being curious, how long do you want to hang out there? You can hang out as long as you want. I really like that one for pain, for chronic pain. Pain is a message from our body, and sometimes we know what the message means, and we're like, I've done all I can do, and we're still getting the message. But what I have noticed is just bringing some like curious, loving attention with touch. Oftentimes the pain is like, it just kind of goes down just a little bit. It doesn't necessarily stop, but it's like kind of like I feel like it's like a toddler that's like, "Hey, hey, hey." And then you're like, "Yes." And it's like, "Nothing." You're like, "Okay. Did you need to be screaming like that?" Um, and then the other place of self-touch, so that self-touch can be used anywhere. Um, and then the other place that is so awesome to bring self-touch, there's two more spots. One is the kidneys, which I don't exactly know where my kidneys are, but the kidneys are in your mid-low back. So I think kind of between the bottom of your ribs and like the top of your butt. That's my guess where my kidneys are. So I have my hands just kind of on my low back. And the kidneys, sitting on top of your kidneys are your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands are these like little triangle, cute like hats made of fat. That's where cortisol and adrenaline, our stress hormones, come from. And the kidneys and the adrenals are super sensitive to touch and warmth. So this is a very restorative practice for people who live with chronic like activation, exhaustion. Um, you can do a heating pad, you can do a hot water bottle, you can do a hot washcloth, and just, yeah, bringing some like attention and warmth to your kidneys is such an awesome practice, especially for people who are moving in towards winter right now. So getting your loving up on your kidneys and adrenals, just topically, if you will. And then the other place that is really awesome to bring self-touch is the base of your skull and your forehead. So the base of your skull is where the like very basic, we call the lizard brain is. So this is the part of our brain, the brain stem that is um, concerned with basic survival is down back here. And then the frontal cortex, where our hand is on the forehead, that I've started calling this the email part of the brain. This is like the very adult, rational, like consequences and action, like it's just all of that stuff. And so I think it's nice to get these two parts of the brain talking to each other and just being like, hey, I see you're really worried about survival. I hear you. Okay, sorry, I remembered one more that I really want to share. So the last self-touch thing is taking the palm of your hand and basically lining it up with the bones around your eyes and covering your eyes. You can have your eyes open or closed, but just letting your eyes get a little bit of a rest. And again, noticing like what happens for you when you do this. Is there any kind of release? Is there a deep breath? And just hang in with that as long as you want. And Grace, I see your hand. Did you have a question? No, okay. Sorry to disturb you out of your peaceful eye hold. This is especially awesome for people who have like eye strain and look at a computer all day. Okay, the last thing that we're gonna do while we're here together, yay, yawning, is the blanket hug. And it's very simple. I'm going to show you if you have a blanket with you or a bath towel also works. Sometimes even just like a big sweater, but if you want to grab a blanket, you can, because we're going to hang out here for a few moments. But basically, we're just gonna cuddle up. So with this practice, I want you to, again, I'm just curious, be curious about like, do you want the blanket tight around your face? Do you actually want more pressure and containment around your shoulders? Does it feel good to go fully in and like be in your little dark cocoon? This is an awesome practice if you have had a long day and you're trying to get to sleep. And I see maybe a question or a comment about that. Yeah, which practice do you go to for insomnia and sleeplessness? This is the one. This is my favorite. And I also have a 1 hour long free class on sleep and insomnia. So I can, when I send out the recording for this, I'll send out the link for that. Because I have an hour's worth of stuff to say about that. I love this one. I love doing it also on Zoom with people and seeing everybody in their little blankets. It's very cute. So that's what I've got for you today. I feel much more calm than I did 1 hour ago when I started this, and I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. What if I say the wrong thing? And now I'm like, oh, I just did somatic stuff for an hour. That feels pretty good. So I really appreciate you being here. If you're here live and if you're watching the recording, thank you for that. Um, yeah, share this with your friends. Like, spread the word. If you have further questions or are curious about working together, you can send me an email or check out my website, which is atticapothecary.com. I love doing somatics with people, and in a somatic session that's one-on-one, it does look quite a bit different because we're actually like talking a little bit about what you feel and what's going on in your life, and not just like trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what lands for your nervous system. So yeah, that's that, y'all. Holler if you need me, but again, appreciate you being here and have it ripple out. So have a good rest of your evening or day. Goodbye.